Hey guys, so I thought in this video I'll do something a bit different and I'll go through my journey as a professional software engineer. I'm a full stack software engineer. That means that I work in all different languages from the back end to the front end, so I can do backend DevOps and hosting and server administration. I can do programming in Python and front-end development in JavaScript and some Android and React and AngularJS. The way that I got into programming was I started when I was 12 years old. I got my first computer and I was just fascinated with making applications, and I was really curious about how you could make your own programs on the computer. I think it was a Windows either 98 or Windows ME machine, so very old from modern standards. So I looked up how to basically program, and I asked my parents, and they didn't know, because I mean, it's not something you know unless you're especially back then, it's not something you know unless you're a professional in working with computers. So I started looking on the internet for how to program. This was the time of MSN Messenger, so I had quite a few contacts that I'd accrued somehow on MSN Messenger, and there was some technical people on there, so I was chatting to them a bit as well. And I started by writing these bash scripts, so Windows bash scripts. So it's just basically a command line script, kind of like a shell script for Windows, that you write a list of commands and it does various things. So that's how I started, and I made a website using, I think it was Geocities or some, I can't remember what the hosting platform was, but it was one of those build your own websites with like a WYSIWYG editor that you would draw on what you wanted, and it would create the website for you and have ads all over the website if you had the free version. But I basically created a website and I started uploading my apps that I made, and it was things like it would rename the file extension from JPEG to PNG, and I called it a JPEG to PNG converter, even though that isn't really converting the image, it's just changing the file name extension. But as a 12-year-old kid, these were the kind of things that I was doing and uploading to the internet. I realized bash scripts are quite limited and you can't do very much with them, and it's basically all command lines, so there's no user interface. And I really wanted to build an application with a user interface, something that you could click on, something that you could actually use. So I found a language called Visual Basic, VB6. And VB6 was when I really started getting into programming. It's fairly easy to learn, at least thinking back. If I could learn it as a 12-year-old, then it must have been fairly simple. But I just spent hours and hours and hours just online looking at other people's source code. So there was various different websites available that you could download free source code. So it was like other people would upload their source code and you could download it and look at their code, a bit like GitHub today, but this was back years and years ago. So I would download these applications and I would just look through them all, and I didn't read any of the VB documentation at all. I just went straight into the source code and started creating things. And with VB6 you can actually you draw the user interface on, so you drag buttons onto the screen and you choose what size you want it, and it's quite easy to make a GUI. When you double click the button from the IDE, it takes you to where you enter the code, and then you can enter code of what that button does when you click it. Spend hours and hours and hours, like basically all of my free time doing this. After a few years I started to get fairly good at it, and I was getting obsessed with making remote TCP connected applications. So I would just make like a client server application, and I'll do some things like you could open the CD drive on the remote computer, or you can display messages on the remote computer, and I would install this on my brother's computer, which is connected on the same network. And I would then have a client tool that I made that you could then control that computer somewhat and make it do things, and just kind of for a laugh. I was obsessed with this kind of client server remote technology. And then I started making chat applications where basically there was a chat server, kind of like IRC, where you have a chat server and then you have various clients. And at first you can get one client working with one server, and then it gets more complicated when you want to have multiple clients working with one server. And I figured all that out, and it was just like those lessons I learned were so important for what I do today. Just the figuring out how to do things, and being passionate about it and enjoying the result, and actually making things that I enjoyed making, because I really enjoyed spending my free time doing this stuff. I started to want to put them on the web. So as I mentioned before, I used Geocities and made kind of a website using their editor, which was very basic. It didn't have much control. And I wanted to be able to do things like, accept messages and actually have a proper functioning website with a back-end language. So then I discovered PHP. I found the W3 Schools website. The w3schools.com website was just the best website to learn these things for me. I blasted through the PHP tutorials and the HTML tutorial, all for free. I didn't take any paid courses or anything at this time, so it was all just looking up things online. So I continued doing that for a year, and school had some lessons on computers, but it was very basic stuff like basic word editing. And at this point, I'm like way beyond all of that, because I'm writing VB6 applications and like actually working apps that even the teachers in the school wouldn't be able to do that at that point. Basically, didn't get much out of school. But then when it came to choosing college, I had the option to choose a computer. It was a BTec National for computer IT practitioners or something like that, and it was a very hands-on course. So there was no exams whatsoever. Some of that involved doing programming. So I did some programming there, but I mean, at that point, the things that they taught you there, they're teaching you basic PHP, and at that point, I'd been doing it for a few years. I'd been learning PHP myself, so I was already way ahead of the curve when it came to what they were teaching there. So I didn't really feel that I got that much value out of the course at college in terms of my career. But I graduated and I got just under the highest marks, and then I went to university at Nottingham-Trent University. I chose computer systems to study there. At this point, I knew that I loved programming, but I never looked at it as a career that I was going to take. My idea was that I was just going to learn it all myself and then build some kind of app or website or something that's wildly successful and brings in millions and millions of pounds. When I chose my college degree, I didn't pick it based on what I wanted to do as a career. And I chose computer systems, which is kind of like an array of different computer related things. There's a lot of architecture and it's like server infrastructure and things. So like, how would you set up an office network and all things like that. There was a bit of programming on it, which I liked. There was a bit of they taught us very tiny bit of C++ and Java. They taught us Java, which was interesting as well. I learned a bit of theory behind the programming, because teaching it yourself, you don't learn a lot of the theory and a lot of the methodologies and things like that. So I did learn a bit of that, but I didn't find it I didn't think it was as beneficial for my career today as basically picking it up and learning it myself and teaching myself was. What was great was that during university, I did a placement year. I did it at a very reputable company in London. I really lucked out because I persisted and carried on trying when everyone else had kind of given up and they said, oh, I'm probably not going to find a placement, so I'm just going to have to continue with the final year. Lots of my friends had kind of decided that they were going to just not do the placement and go straight for the final year. Right at the end of the summer, just before it was time probably to go back to uni, I got a call from a company that I started working at. So it was a big company. They do news, financial platforms and all these things. Yeah, I started working at a year placement there. And again, I think I was quite lucky with the placement I got, because I got an amazing placement. It wasn't like they, that I just was making the tea for everyone and stuff. I was actually in the trenches doing the work. I was learning so much from them. And a lot of it was kind of server administration. So it was, they had these big IBM Blade Chassis, which are like slot in the servers that you slot into this big chassis. And I was doing a lot of the maintenance on them. So I'd have to come in on the weekend, come into London and basically replace memory and replace CPUs and deal with the IBM support and deal with all these basically deal with these vendors and these companies, and also do a lot of the virtualization. There was huge virtualization projects. So I was working on a lot of virtualization and these quite technical things. So it was VMware, setting up VMware ESX servers, which are like virtualization servers. If you ever buy a virtual server online, then it's going to be running on an application similar to ESX, probably not exactly ESX, but that was an amazing experience. And during that time, I really like made a huge effort to like really impress everyone, and I didn't ever want to let anyone down, and I just worked really, really hard. I was working like 12-hour days and commuting. I was commuting about 4 hours a day as well, so just ridiculously long days, and getting up at 5 in the morning to get the train every day, because I was still living with my parents and I had to commute into London. I did that for a year, and at the end they didn't really want me to go back to uni. They asked me if I would stay on for another year and delay university longer, and I really didn't want to do that. I was really ready to go back after working so hard for a year, and I was ready to go back and have the kind of easy life that it seemed to be as a student. I went back to university, and I did the final year. At the end, I had a bit of money left over, so I decided that I wasn't going to rush into like finding a job. I was just going to, kind of take it easy for a few weeks, maybe do some traveling or something. But I did upload my CV to a couple of websites. I actually started to get some calls. So I got a call of a recruiter on I think it was the last day of university, or I was still in student halls, or I think university had finished. And I got a call from a recruiter, and they were like, we have your CV. There's a company that really is really interested, and are looking for someone just like you. So we'd love for you to come for an interview. I thought, well, this kind of came to me. I didn't actively look for this. So this was the first time I was dealing with recruiters as well. So I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. That was another company in London, and just after that, another recruiter called me up and asked me if I was available for an interview for a different company. So I was kind of going for an interview at two companies at the same time. So I went for this interview for this first company, and I got offered the role after two interviews. So it was one interview with the manager and then one interview with the CTO. But yeah, they offered me the role. So I was like, well, it was great. It was great money, at least compared to the internship that I had. It seemed like a really great company, and it was a really amazing company. So yeah, I basically worked there for 2 years, and at that point, this was like a IT coordinator role. So there was no programming. But even though there was no programming in the role, I still found some programming work to do while I was there. So I kind of part of the role was to manage these video conference units that we had in all the offices. So it was a global company. It had offices in like many countries around the world, and we had video conference units that would connect them together. We had an issue where they were just kind of crashing, and they would just stop working, and there would be these random problems that would occur. We needed to restart these like frequently. So I made a script using VB script that ran on a server that would periodically check. It would connect into these servers. You could actually connect into them using SSH and do some checks and restart them. So it'd restart the unit if it found some issues with it. And then we built this up so that it was actually even more advanced, and it would actually call the units together. So it would take a random unit on one side of the world and a random unit on the other side of the world, and it would make a call between them, and it would answer the call on the other side during the non-office hours. And then it would record the stats of that call to a SQL database. So then we could see like, oh, were the stats high enough? If the stats weren't high enough above the threshold, so the kind of kilobits per second and things, if they weren't above the threshold, then it would email us. It would send a notification to us to say there's a problem here, so we should actually go and look into it. That was great, but I mean, that wasn't the primary role. The primary role was basically vendor management, project management, things like that. It was a great experience, but at the time I still did not want to do programming as a profession. So I was still doing it in my spare time. I was still enjoying doing it, but for some reason I just really didn't want to do it for other companies. I don't really know what the reason was. I felt like, that maybe there was no future in that career, or that I'd been told some things along the way that were about programming, saying how there's all the programmers are being offshored to different countries outside the UK, and I kind of believed that stuff. So I was like, I really, for some reason, just didn't want to do programming as a career at that point. As I worked there for, I think it was a year and a half, the CTO actually asked my boss if they needed a developer on the team. So they asked my boss whether I would be interested in doing some programming. My boss asked me the question, and at first I was like, I I do enjoy programming, but it's not really something I want to do as a career, so I'm going to have to turn it down. I actually turned it down initially, but then I went home and I thought about it, and I was like, well, why do I not want to do it as a career? Like, why would I not want to do what I basically love doing? I thought about it a bit, and then I decided, I'll give it a shot. They gave me some programming roles, or some more programming tasks on top of the video conference stuff. They gave me some more programming jobs. One of them was to design again, it was using VB script and HTML, and it was called a pre-boot environment for Windows. What I created was an app that allowed you to configure your machine and how you wanted to build your machines. I made an application that you could actually, you typed in your details and it would figure out what needed to be installed, and it would configure a remote server that was sending the applications to send the correct set of applications for that particular user, so that when their system was reinstalled, it had all the applications that they needed to use. So I worked on that and I really enjoyed that. And at this point, I'm doing this part-time. So it's supposed to be like 35% programming and 65% doing the other stuff that I was doing, which was vendor management, license management, like Microsoft license management and things like that. But I was enjoying the programming, so I asked to do more, and this project had a particular deadline, so I was like, look, if we're going to meet this deadline, I'm going to need to do just this programming, like focus on this entirely for like 2-3 weeks, and then we'll be able to release it. So I did that. They let me do that, and that was great. But then after that kind of finished, and I went back to the other stuff, I kind of I'd got a taste of the programming, and I really felt like, I felt like this is what I wanted to do now. I could see that there was a lot of demand for programmers in the industry. There was a lot of demand, and I just thought, with my experience that I have of programming since I was 12 years old, so this is a long time of like being a programmer, maybe not professionally, but I've been programming and building apps like all the time. I started looking for other roles and I started applying, but it's at first they tell you like, oh, that's great that they don't care about that you've been programming since you're 12 years old. Like, they don't, a lot of the time, these companies and these recruiters, they don't seem to care about that. All they care about is number of years of professional experience. This is a bit frustrating to me, because I was like, maybe I don't have this working in a company for programming, but I have personal experience and I have projects and things that I've done. I was at least qualified for a junior programming position. But I just kept on trying, and I did interview after interview after interview, and these all these tests that they would send you, like these little coding challenges and things. I would do these over and over again, and I would just like really just keep trying. And I had so many phone interviews and so many I didn't get many face-to-face interviews. I did just mostly phone interviews. But then there was a startup that was hiring, that we actually knew someone through my wife, or then girlfriend. They were looking for a developer for their startup. There was like 3 people working in the startup at the time. I met them in person, face to face, and they basically offered me a role there, and it was on more money than I was earning at the previous job. So I was like, this is amazing. And it was just purely programming. They needed someone to build the application and work on building the platform, and it was going to be a backend with an API, a website, and 2 app or an Android and iOS app. I was really happy to get this role, and it was really a turning point for me. They appreciated more my history of experience and my history of knowledge and my passion for programming, as opposed to just X number of years programming professionally. I took that role and I started working as soon as my notice period was up. I worked there for 2 years, and for the whole 2 years I just focused on constant programming and constant building my skills, learning new things, and really getting involved and making an effort and working quite hard at this app. And we turned it from basically a simple PHP website to a kind of professional Python backend website with a REST API. So we built a REST API using Django REST Framework, and I was learning all these new things. Like, I hadn't touched Python or anything before. When they offered me the role and I accepted it for the notice period that I was working at the previous company, in my free time, I was really learning Python and started learning aggressively and picking it up, so that when I would start, I would be ready. I used Python as the back-end programming language there while I was there for 2 years, and that was really great. I really appreciate that experience. It really helped grow my career. But then after that, I started to feel like, I felt like it was time to move on and do something else and do something a bit different. Yeah, I basically decided that I wanted to be more free and do contracting and freelance work. Freelance and contracting is a lot more high pressure. You're expected to perform a lot better and be very skilled in that when you join, and there's not much time for kind of training and things like that, which is what I wanted, because that's how you grow. That's how you grow and learn. I left that and I started to contract, and since then I've been contracting for just about a year now. I've only worked at 2 companies because I keep going back and forth to 2 companies. They keep asking me to go back, but I'm really enjoying it and I'm really finding it really rewarding work. Yeah, that's basically how I got to where I am today. The main thing that I've learned, the number one most important thing from working at all these different companies, and I know that my career is still young and there's people that have worked in industry for 20, 30 years. From what I've learned from my experiences, the number one most important thing to have when it comes to all of this stuff and whatever you want to succeed at is the attitude that you have towards it. Whatever you're working, whatever you're doing, whoever you're working for, you've got to have a good attitude towards the work. Impress people. Try and impress people. Don't just do the bare minimum that you can. And it's very easy now in this where we are today, where programming skills are in high demand, and especially in cities like where I live in London, and I'd imagine around the world, programming is in high demand. I get like 3 or 4 calls a day from recruiters, like for different roles that they want to try and hire me for. So because it's in demand, to be like, I don't need to try as hard now because I'm in demand, so I could just work anywhere. And that's not a good attitude to have. The attitude that you want to have is you want to continue to grow your skills, continue to be better, continue to really work hard and really try and impress people. Even if you come in starting at this from, very little experience and you're just getting into it now, you don't need to learn it from 12 years old to be a professional developer. If you really dive into it and you work hard and you're willing to sacrifice some time and put the effort in and the hours in, then you can learn anything and you can learn it really quickly. You could work for any company, you could work for anywhere that you want, any type of role that you want, you can get it. You just got to work hard at it and keep trying. Like in my last contract, I didn't really know. They wanted someone to work on AngularJS projects, so like front-end AngularJS projects, and I didn't really know that Angular super well at the time. I touched it a little bit, Angular 1. They do you have experience with this? I was like, I don't have tons of experience with it, but I've played around with it a bit, and I'm sure I could pick it up and go through. And they were like, that's fine. So I joined, and I was kind of learning on the fly and using my skills that I'd learned previously, but applying them. So the skills of like learning new things quickly and applying that to learning Angular. And I delivered what they wanted. I delivered it. They were very happy with it. It was delivered on time, and they were pleased. They got good feedback. And the point I'm trying to make is that it's not about how many years experience you have working on something. It's about the attitude that you have when it comes to working on it. So like when I was working on this Angular project, I was aware that I was not as skilled on Angular as I probably needed to be at the time. In my spare time, I just started constantly reading the documentation, listening to Angular podcasts when I was on the way to work, like just listening to these things and just really immersing myself in the technology so that I could impress and so that I could do a good job there. You got to have a good attitude, you got to work hard, and you got to keep learning new things. And the most important thing in this industry is to learn new things. You got to keep learning, keep expanding your skills. That's my experience. Sorry, it's been quite a long video. But I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it useful if you are looking to get into the career. I hope it can give you some encouragement. And if you have any questions or you want any advice or anything, or you want to share your story, then please feel free to leave a comment below. And I love to read the comments and get back to the comments and things like that. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.